So good afternoon, folks. My name is Ian Ali, and I'm Group Vice President of Zeta Global's Programmatic Commercial US team. It is a high privilege for me, really, today to introduce our very own and accomplished keynote speaker, really the legendary John Sculley. John is the co-founder of Zeta Global and also former CEO of Apple and PepsiCo. Today's session is going to be moderated by Oswald Mendez, CEO and co-founder of New Majority Ready, and also leader in the multicultural and media space. This is going to be a candid conversation of how marketing really has evolved with the progression of data and AI-led strategies, overcoming existential threats, but more deeply connecting with consumers. And really how the events of this interesting year, as David says, 2020, will shape the future of marketing forever. That said, I want to bring on Oswald. Oswald, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you, Ian, for inviting me to participate in today's session. It's a huge honor to be able to moderate this session with John Sculley. And if we could just bring John on, that would be fantastic, so we can kick things off. This is going to be a journey into time. We're going to talk a little bit about past, present, and future, and just dig a little deep into John's incredible wisdom that he can share with all of us today. I was fortunate enough to have a prep call with John last week, and it was a bit longer than 15 minutes, so I am a very lucky individual to have had that opportunity. So if I believe John is coming on anytime now. If not, I can continue to chat. The goal of the conversation really is, as I mentioned, is to take us through a journey into time. The past experiences that John has had have been invaluable, and there he is. So good to see you again, John.
Hi, Oswald. Nice to see you again.
Yes, fantastic. Excited. For a minute, I was like, oh my God, I'm being stood up. It's not the first time it's happened. So I was like, no. So good to see you. You know, as I was telling the folks, you know, we're gonna take a little trip into time today and go through the past, present, and future. And one of the quotes that I read about you that you've said is that, you know, you believe that crisis tends to help develop the character of organization. And you know, we have gone today through a crisis of epic proportions. And it's not the first time that people and organizations have had to be resilient and rise above challenges that seem insurmountable. So what do you think, you know, have been changes that have been precipitated by today's crisis that you knew were already in the making, but just because of the crisis that we're facing have been precipitated?
Well, of course, I was like everybody else. I was caught by surprise by COVID-19 and the scale at which this pandemic has taken on. But you're absolutely right. You know, you don't want to miss the opportunity of a crisis. One of the companies I'm involved with is a telehealth company called MD Live. We were already pretty successful. We had a long belief that telehealth was going to become important, just like I remember decades ago having a great belief that online banking was going to become important, but there were a lot of skeptics. Well, the pandemic created a crisis that was amazing for the telehealth industry because suddenly it became the go-to service for so many people. And there are many big success stories. Teladoc, Livongo, MD Live, Amwell have all had incredible growth. A lot of part of it can be attributed to the coronavirus. People weren't going to hospitals and doctor clinics. And there are other examples, I think, where people have been able to say, gee, we can adapt. And I call that adaptive innovation, being innovative that takes advantage of how circumstances change. On the other hand, you want to always have preparation. And so preparation means that you're constantly trying to make sure you're ready for whatever comes about. You can't anticipate crises all the time, obviously, but you can be ready to have a strong organization and understand which levers to pull, so that when a unique event does occur, like a pandemic, you can say, okay, I can adapt.
Yeah. That's a great example of how companies have adapted in terms of their product offering and new ways of bringing products to light and new uses for product. In terms of adaptive innovation, what would you say have been some types of innovations that marketers have had to implement as a result of today, of what we're going through today? Businesses have to reinvent themselves all the time, and marketers have to obviously constantly have to market their products.
Well, I'll give you another example. And it goes back to the beginning of the pandemic, when things shut down. And it was just at the time of the Final Four, which is a big event. Many marketers take advantage of that annual basketball competition of the final best of class teams that are competing to be number one in basketball. Well, when that went down, there were no audiences. Well, one of the things we realized we could do, because we collect 2,500 individual data points, signals, as we call them at Zeta, on all the individuals, basically everybody in the United States. And what that meant was, we said, gee, we could create lookalike audiences. We could create what we called affinity audiences. So advertisers who had planned to advertise on the Final Four, we said, well, there won't be a physical audience in place, but we know enough about the audience that attends the Final Four, either the watching audience or the in-place audience actually at the event. We know both. We can create a lookalike audience. We call them affinity audience. Well, that opened up a whole new opportunity that we hadn't thought about. It's another example of, when you have a crisis, think about what you can do to take advantage of that. And it's something which I think probably other people found opportunities to reinvent themselves in a way that can adapt. It's, again, adaptive innovation.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example in terms of how to reach audiences that we thought were lost through Zeta and what you offer as a company, and that can be applied to any live event. I'm a huge fan of sci-fi, and I was not able to attend Comic-Con this year, so both through geo-targeting and geofencing, you have the capability to go back in time and figure out those folks that attended a Comic-Con convention in San Diego or New York and be able to retarget those audiences. So that's fantastic. So now heading very organically into today, 2020 has really brought an interesting intersection of digital and cultural transformation. And the diverse audiences that are in the marketplace, what we call in my company, the new majority, can no longer be ignored by marketers. They want to be heard, they want to be seen, and they want to be engaged authentically. I go back a little bit to another quote of yours that said that marketing is really theater. It's like staging a performance. And in that, you reference to the Pepsi challenge. Today, there's more than one stage, and not every audience is going to be engaged or buy into the performance for the same reasons. So if you were to tackle the Pepsi challenge today, how would you approach it, and how would it be different?
Well, first, let me tell people what the Pepsi Challenge was, because that was back in the mid-1970s. So there may not be a lot of people in the audience who actually saw it. At that time, I was the marketing VP of Pepsi when we started, and I was eventually the CEO of Pepsi when we completed it, and had our real major success when we actually passed Coca-Cola as the largest selling consumer packaged good in America. But at the time we started the Pepsi Challenge, Oswald, we were outsold by Coke 10-1 in 50% of the United States. And so we said, well, what do we do to stand out against that time, the world's most valuable, famous brand, Coca-Cola? So we found out from a blind taste test that we actually tasted a little bit better in blind taste tests to Coca-Cola, but as soon as you put the brand names on, everybody always wanted Coke. So we came up with this idea of a challenge, that Pepsi would challenge Coke with a blind taste test, and we'd run real live taste tests in shopping centers, in universities, a lot of public places. And it drew a lot of attention because we were making commercials with then the first handheld video cameras that had come out, and it had a authentication to it which people hadn't seen in commercials up until that time. And so we saw that as a presentation that would grab attention. Remember, there were only 3 television networks at that time. Some years later, when Steve Jobs recruited me to Apple, he didn't recruit me because I could help him to build a better computer. He knew how to do that with the Macintosh. But the Macintosh was an outrageously controversial idea when it first came out. In Silicon Valley, they called it the Steve Jobs reality distortion field, because no one except Steve Jobs thought computers were for non-technical people. And Steve had this vision that non-technical people, if you made the machines easy enough and gave them apps that could enable them to do creative things, that the industry would be much bigger for non-technical people. And of course, we know that's how it turned out. But Steve said, I've got to find a way to market it. And I've never done consumer marketing before. So my role was to work with Steve and to come up with ways that we'd used in consumer marketing that we could adapt to the high-tech industry. And one of the things that I learned was how good Steve Jobs is on his feet. And so Steve was constantly preparing himself. Every time he would say, and one more thing at an event, he had rehearsed that over and over and over, but he made it seem so easy. And so we used Steve's charisma and his ability to explain things in simple ways to be marketing his theater. That was a big part of our marketing, was big events. And we carried that over to other big events with the introduction of the Macintosh in 1984 in January, which was coincidental with the Super Bowl. And we came out with the first mega commercial on the Super Bowl, which was, I don't know if people have ever seen it, but it's still on Google if you have curiosity to go back. And it was all about these men with lobotomies who were marching into a room, and they were looking up at the InfoSpeak screen, reminiscent of George Orwell's 1984. And then down the center of the aisle comes this athletic lady swinging a hammer, and if she swings it and releases it, it goes through the air, it hits the screen and explodes. And it says, on January 24th, 1984, 1984 will not be like 1984. And that was how we introduced Macintosh. And the theater of it was actually so important that we never showed the product. We never described what Macintosh was. And yet it became the most famous commercial of the decade. So marketing as theater, I think, still has relevance, but you have to figure out how do you adapt to theater, because not everybody is Steve Jobs, and not every product is a Macintosh.
Yeah, no, totally agree. By the way, for the newer generation, Fortnite just copied that commercial from 1984 recently. So it's very interesting because what you're talking about, it strikes me that only 3 networks were available at the time. Data was scarce. Very few media choices. There's a perception of the audience that's a bit more homogeneous than what it is today. So with the advent of data and now with all of the offering that Zeta has, you've said that Zeta is a platform. It's not a product that can be complementary to CMOs by being both foundational and additive. So taking the Pepsi challenge from the past, putting it in today, and combining it with the fact that Zeta is a platform, not a product, and it's complementary. How would you tackle reaching those audiences today?
Well, first of all, we have to reset how marketing is conceptualized today versus what it was in the examples I was giving of decades ago. Today, a brand is not a product by itself. A brand is an experience, and it's an experience that can be stretched out from the using, in the case of data, at Zeta we have 2,500 data signals on every individual. Looking at that as a platform, you say, I've got to build a systemic way of marketing. And so the systemic way of marketing is to say, I've got to be able to take connectivity, because I can have a relationship with a person, which begins with tracking what they're interested in, making predictions about what products they might like, how it coincides with their behavior. So you weight the algorithms accordingly to each individual. Remember, a campaign can have different copy for each individual. That was not possible back in the earlier days of 3 television networks. So the ability to have a systemic way of thinking about the design of your campaign that can adapt to the individual, can engage the individual from the time that you acquire the customer. But what you really want is the retention of the customer. You want to build the loyalty of the customer. More and more businesses are moving to subscription and membership type business models. You couldn't do that without a data platform that is so precise in terms of how it can be structured, that it is not just collecting a lot of data and looking at demographics or psychographics, but it's actually saying, we can make it foundational to everything we do. And that's why you see that the big outcome, I think, from the coronavirus is that it accelerated not just markets like Zoom video or telehealth or Peloton or things like that, which are some of the success stories, but it also means that more people are now living in a virtualized world. More things are done online than were ever done before the pandemic began. Well, when the pandemic's over, that's not going away. We're going to be living in a more virtualized world going forward. It's just that we accelerated getting there. So that only increases the importance of being able to think about your marketing, not just as digital data, but data as a system on which you can build various campaigns. And the whole thesis of Zeta is to say, we can take AI data and we can customize it to give you tools. You can build these campaigns yourself, or we can help you build them. We don't do the creative, but we can help you craft those digital platforms. And I think this is the future of marketing. While I came into marketing back with the Pepsi generation at a time when television screens were just converting from small black and white to 20-inch color screens, and the whole Pepsi generation was, we went out to Hollywood and we got the most famous directors of the large screen movies, and we said, give us 60-second movies that we can run on television. And that became the Pepsi generation. No one had ever done lifestyle quality advertising before, because no one had ever had larger screen television sets. Well, we adapted to that. And now we have to adapt to a world where the screen may be an iPhone or an Android phone. The screen may be an iPad. The screen may be a television. It may be a personal computer. We have all different kinds of screens. So we have to be able to adapt to that. And there's no outcome, I think, that isn't going to be a successful adaptation unless you have command of your digital platform. I'm talking about as a CMO, a chief marketing officer.
Yeah. I mean, and it sounds like we're going to have the perfect combination of precision targeting, empathy messaging, and then the power of machine learning that gives you a continuous feedback loop. I'm actually paraphrasing things that you've already said, but I thought that's so important.
As you said, we had a conversation a few days ago. What I love about what you're doing is that you're looking at the majority as really a symbol of many diversities, and that's the world we live in. We can actually not have to look at the world of the silent majority, as they called it back in the 1970s, because we had no idea who they were. All we knew was there were a lot of people out there who were important to marketers, important to politicians, but no one really knew much about them. Today, we know with great precision about what people's interests are, what their behaviors are, how they are influenced by other people who's maybe reacting to a product or service, how a brand is not only the transaction, but a brand is the whole evolution of choice, of paying for it, of receiving it, maybe sending it back if it isn't perfect, getting a replacement. It's all of those things. And so it's a huge, huge opportunity to reconceptualize not just your company, but reconceptualize your entire industry. So it's an amazing time to be a marketing person today.
Yeah, indeed. I think we have time for one more question, if I've been tracking the time correctly. For those marketers out there that are paralyzed by the fear of data and the fear of perhaps getting it wrong in speaking to diverse audiences, what advice do you give to them?
Well, I can tell you that every job I've ever had, I was never qualified for it. I remember when I was made marketing VP of Pepsi, and I was the first MBA Pepsi had ever hired. If there'd been more talent around, they probably would have picked somebody else, but I was available. And they put me in and they said, Sculley, you're totally unqualified for this job. And they said, you're going to have to be a high wire act. Well, obviously, you go into a job somewhat fearful that, what if I fail? The thing I learned in Silicon Valley, Oswald, is that failure is just part of the experience. And of course you make mistakes. Everybody does. I've made them. Other people make them. Even the most successful people that I've ever known have made mistakes and built on that learning experience of making mistakes and building your confidence. So data is a little bit threatening if you don't come from it as a coder or a mathematician or data scientist. But the reality is we're now able to work at a level above writing the code. We're able now to think about it as connecting ideas and creativity with opportunity and looking at things from the standpoint of how do I learn to use the data, not how do I become an expert in the technology of creating the data. Fortunately, you've got companies like Zeta, and there are others too, obviously, who have invested a lot of talent and money into building these type of capabilities. But we can now kind of live above the technology and take advantage of the technology.
Excellent. Well, John, thank you so much for your time. I am obviously always in awe of when I speak with you, and I really appreciate the time that you've dedicated to today's session. Any last words before we say goodbye to the folks out there?
I just am so excited to still be able to be a part of the things that are going on. I still work with startup companies, helping entrepreneurs build things that have never been built before. And I can just tell you, as you get older, you don't run out of enthusiasm.